Alright guys, welcome back for another video. In today's video I want to talk about a Substack article I recently published titled Energy is the Currency of Life. I'll put the link to the Substack article in the description of this video. If you prefer to read it in that format, please click that link, go down that path. But if you prefer the audio version, stick with me here, tune in for this video, and let's dive in. Energy is the currency of life. Everything we value on Earth is a derivative of the energy generated from the sun. Roughly 70% of the sun's atomic makeup is comprised of hydrogen. Hydrogen also comprises the majority of the atoms in the molecular structure of water, H2O. The human body is comprised primarily of water, with a molecule representing just over 50% of our body weight. No one knows for certain how water originated on Earth, but many scientists believe that it was delivered to Earth from the asteroid belt. The boundary of the region where ice could form in the early solar system was known as the frost line, or snow line, located in the modern asteroid belt between about 2.7 and 3.1 astronomical units from the sun. However it got here, the presence of water and carbon dioxide combined with sunlight to imbue Earth with qualities that are uniquely conducive to life, where single-celled organisms could evolve into complex life. Fast forward several hundred million years, and Earth is a lush green paradise with deep oceans of blue, a beautifully yet brutally efficient ecosystem. Plants synthesize water and sunlight, or organic hydrogen and oxygen, with carbon dioxide to create the food we eat and the air we breathe. Carbon, an essential element on Earth, is absorbed by plants and is part of every living thing as it moves through the food web. It is naturally released through volcanoes, soil erosion, and evaporation. Often referred to as the Earth's thermostat, carbon absorbs and retains heat, regulating the Earth's temperature to make the planet habitable. Excesses in carbon increase the efficiency of plant photosynthesis significantly, primarily through decreasing a plant's water loss. This creates an environment where plant biomass grows, drawing excess carbon out of the atmosphere to bring atmospheric carbon into balance. This process would be completely self-regulating if not for its ability to deplete the soil of vital nutrients. Not all of the carbon on Earth is involved in the carbon cycle above ground. Vast quantities of it are stored underground in reserves in the form of fossil fuels. Carbon comprises roughly 85% of the biological weight of petroleum. Most of the Earth's reserves today are located in sedimentary basins where ancient seabeds used to lie. Dead algae and plankton drifted to the seabed where they were absorbed and compressed under heat and pressure for millions of years, creating the most potent form of energy ever known to man. The first mention of petroleum is in the historical records by the Chinese in the 1st century BCE. But it took roughly 2,000 years for humans to learn to distill it and transmute it into the potent energetic substance we know as oil today. The application of oil for industrial use really ushered in the Industrial Revolution and is the basis for modern society. John D. Rockefeller was the man to scale its production globally through his Standard Oil empire. Adjusting for inflation, John D. Rockefeller was by far the wealthiest man to ever live. We are living in an era defined by massive consumption of fossil hydrocarbons at a pace that is millions of times faster than the rate at which they were created. Scientists project that the Earth's oil reserves will decline by 50% by 2050. This is bad news for an economy that depends on growth. It is bad news for those who wish for peace as well, as physical energy reserves are vulnerable to theft for more foreign militaries who become more aggressive in an era of scarcity. It is no surprise then to learn that the majority of all oil is produced in the global East, specifically the Middle East. The share of global oil production in the US is roughly 13%, and Russia's share is slightly higher at 15%. Canada controls roughly 6% of global oil production. These three nations, combined with the nations surrounding the Persian Gulf, also known as the Black Triangle, define the global oil markets. Our economy is driven primarily by GDP, which is really an economic measurement that is driven by two primary factors: the issuance of government debt and the consumption of fossil hydrocarbons. These two phenomena could not be more drastically opposite in their supply and demand dynamics. Oil demand scales with the growth of humanity, and its supply is severely constrained. Meanwhile, the demand for government debt is diminishing, and the supply is expanding at an exponential rate that is beyond the comprehension of the human mind. It is impossible to determine exactly how much total debt exists in the world, both private and public, but the word quadrillion would need to be employed to embark on the task. Throughout our lifetime, much of the bad private debt has been absorbed by governments, leading to a concentration of debt at the sovereign level, also known as the sovereign debt bubble. All one has to do is go to the usdebtclock.org to see the numbers for themselves. All this debt represents a diluted claim on future economic production that will be constrained by diminishing energy inputs. The debt and energy problem has grown over the course of our lives, and we have not seen a collapse in the sovereign bond markets yet. This leads to the psychological fallacy known as risk homeostasis. When human beings take risk and do not experience the negative consequences of that risk, they lose the ability to perceive the risk and actually increase their tendency to engage in risk-taking behaviors in the future. Think of someone who runs a red light a dozen times that can easily delude themselves into believing that running red lights is not risky. Of course, this makes no logical sense, but it is a known flaw in the human mind, our shared operating software. The severing of our debt-based currencies from the underlying energetic reality of the world injects massive instability and risk into the sovereign debt markets. It is not just energy that is scarce, but also our own physical and mental energy that we spend to acquire money. We spend most of our time engaged in this pursuit, and time is the scarcest asset many of us will ever have, or all of us will ever have. Breaking the link between money and physical reality is similar to an engineer constructing a building in a way that violates the laws of physics. The building may stand for a while, but ultimately it will fall. Debt is a lien on energy, the base currency of life. It pulls energy away from the future into the present to be utilized by the issuer of the debt. Energy is thus stolen from debt holders, whether they are aware of it or not. Our debt-based money isn't governed by energy laws. However, it represents claims on energy, heavily diluted claims. If we ever plan to honor our debts, the amount of energy required will be immense. If the energy is not available at cheap prices, the debts can never be repaid. Many people have destroyed their reputations trying to predict the date that the sovereign bond market will collapse. We can know with certainty that it will inevitably reach the end of the road, but we can never know exactly when that will be. Ernest Hemingway's novel, The Sun Also Rises, includes the dialogue, "How did you go bankrupt?" Bill asked. "Two ways," Mike said. "Gradually, and then suddenly." That pivotal moment where a bubble fueled by debt and leverage transitions from gradually to suddenly is fundamentally driven by a collapse in trust. This is also referred to as a Minsky moment. Trust, just like the money itself, is disconnected from our physical reality. Its establishment is a form of power projection and deception. It exists only in our minds, not in our physical reality. When the illusion fades and trust breaks down, sovereign bond markers who refuse to sell will be the proverbial sovereign bag holders. So how do we create the link between our money and our physical reality? That is the million-dollar question, one I believe that Bitcoin ultimately solves through its proof-of-work algorithm. Wall Street lives in a persistent state of energy blindness, fueled by a potent cocktail of profits, narcissism, and often large amounts of cocaine. Above all of this, their energy blindness is due to their status as a privileged beneficiary of a monetary system where the money costs nothing to produce. This is their blind spot that will ultimately be their undoing. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. Before we dive into the nuances of Bitcoin's proof-of-work algorithm, let's revisit some of the fundamental realities of energy that are consistently ignored or denied by Nobel Prize-winning PhD economists and central bankers. The following ideas could each serve as the basis for an entire article. Biological organisms optimize energy intake versus expenditure for growth, defense, and reproduction. Net energy after costs drives natural and human systems. Biological systems maximize power through metabolism and energy transformation. Systems optimize useful power, outcompeting less efficient ones. Human society transitions are tied to energy availability. Fossil energy revolutionized productivity, surpassing human labor significantly. The global economy relies heavily on fossil fuels, creating high GDP per capita. Profitability is vulnerable to energy cost increases. Energy sources differ fundamentally, lacking complete substitutability. Some industrial processes heavily relying on fossil fuels lack low-carbon alternatives. Energy availability sets limits on societal scale and economic growth. Renewable energy's growth hasn't offset fossil fuel consumption. Economic contraction might be necessary to decarbonize effectively. Human culture functions like a self-organized, energy-seeking superorganism, following simple behavioral rules. Credit and finance have allowed for unsustainable consumption beyond available resources, leading to economic growth fueled by debt. Despite efficiency improvements, energy and GDP remain tightly correlated globally. GDP growth reflects energy consumption, and absolute decoupling of GDP and energy consumption is yet to occur globally. So with all that in mind, you can essentially think of technology as an expression of all the available energy that we're able to exploit. Its progress supports greater energy throughput, driving economic complexity. Technological progress is essentially the development of the capital base to support an ever greater throughput of energy at a later date. Growing GDP depends on an extra energy enabling more inventions, resulting in an energy complexity spiral. Unfortunately, Earth's carbon battery in the form of oil reserves is being depleted rapidly. Despite advancements, unconventional oil extraction is costly and faces steep decline rates. Debt infusions sustain temporary energy increases, but unsustainable practices lead to steeper future declines in energy reserves. The unfortunate reality is that the sovereign debt market requires perpetually increasing growth in GDP to avoid collapse. As Max Kaiser so eloquently states, you can't taper a Ponzi. Rebuilding the bridge between money and energy in the digital age. Gold was utilized as money for thousands of years due to its link to our physical reality. The supply of gold is limited by nature, which imposes direct energy cost to extract it from the earth. Gold cannot be produced without expending energy. Of all the characteristics of gold, this is the primary reason it was chosen by the free market to be money for thousands of years. The cost of any commodity trends towards its cost of production, and the cost of production of fiat currency is effectively zero. Now, Bitcoin is also tethered to physical reality through its proof-of-work algorithm and the cost of production measured in kilowatt hours to produce Bitcoin. The energy source used to produce Bitcoin is electricity, which is an increasingly non-carbon-based energy source, whereas the energy source behind gold production is primarily petroleum-based fossil fuels that power the drills and heavy machinery used for extraction. The proof-of-work algorithm enforces a cost so high upon malicious actors who would seek to rewrite the Bitcoin ledger that they are incentivized just to contribute their computing power towards securing the ledger. Today, we measure the block subsidy reward on the Bitcoin network in dollar terms as a unit of measurement. But this unit of measurement is unstable and constantly changing. What we are ultimately trying to measure is the value of the energy in kilowatt hours that it costs Bitcoin miners to receive a block subsidy reward. If you calculate the cost of production for Bitcoin miners averaged across the entire market, you find the average price where Bitcoin ultimately bottoms out in its bear markets. This works despite a significant variation in production costs around the world. Remember, the cost of all commodities trend toward their cost of production. This aggregate cost of production would correlate with the steep drop in the hash price of Bitcoin, or the daily revenue of miners each day divided by their daily hash rate. This is the phase of the market cycle where inefficient miners are flushed out and efficient miners acquiring a larger share of the global hash rate. Mining hardware becomes inexpensive, and well-capitalized miners are able to build inventory at discounts that will not be seen for another few years. During this period of the market, miners generally find that credit is too tight to utilize to expand their operations. The bulk of the funds to expand operations must be drawn from the profits secured in the prior bull market. It's this very reason why Bitcoin miners who plan for the worst possible scenario are often in the best position to prepare for the next Bitcoin halving cycle. Now, the bear market capitulation phase of the market cycle generally occurs relatively close to the halving. After the halving, the block subsidy reward of the network is suddenly cut in half, which abruptly raises Bitcoin's cost of production by roughly double its previous amount. Essentially, the floor on Bitcoin's price propels much higher overnight. And for this reason, it's extremely unlikely that Bitcoin's price ever retests a prior bear market low after the halving occurs. Post-halving, hash rate tends to dip as inefficient miners are forced to unplug their machines. This, combined with dramatic upwards pressure on price post-halving, hash price tends to rise in this phase of the market cycle. The miners who are not washed out by the abrupt 50% decrease in block subsidy rewards resulting from the halving are generally awarded a higher market price for each unit of hashing power as the cycle continues, measured in dollars per terahash per second per day. As price rises and hash price rises with it, the market value of Bitcoin mining hardware tends to outperform even Bitcoin itself. Although the cost of production for Bitcoin doubles after the halving, it essentially remains fixed from that point forward, aside from annual inflationary pressures. After the next Bitcoin halving in April 2024, the block subsidy reward of 6.25 Bitcoin per block will drop to 3.125 Bitcoin per block. The aggregate cost of production for Bitcoin will rise from around the 15,000 area that marked the bottom of the bear market to roughly 30,000, laying the foundation for a new price floor. If the halving initiates a bull run and price trades many multiples higher, miners' margins will exponentially increase. They will still be accumulating Bitcoin for around 30,000, while everyone else is forced to buy it at a market price north of 100,000 or even 200,000. Despite an advantageous environment for miners in this phase of the cycle, hash rate actually still lags price, leading to a rise in hash price because miners are rate limited by their access to physical hardware and energy inputs in a way that the speculative market value of Bitcoin against the dollar is not. Put another way, the price of Bitcoin can 20x in a period of 12 months in a bull market, but no mining operation can 20x their inventory or secure access to 20x the amount of energy that they have access to within a period of 12 months. This is why hash rate always lags price in the bull market. Bitcoin is not the only thing that mining equipment generates. They also generate a substantial amount of heat, which has a market value when applied to creative applications. In a world where fresh water is becoming scarce, one could imagine a scenario where the heat emitted from Bitcoin miners is used to assist in providing the heat required to evaporate and desalinate water, converting it into fresh water fit for consumption. Energy is the true economic currency, and Bitcoin is the only monetary network that can effectively harness that value over time in a trustless fashion. Bitcoin can be thought of as a call option on energy with no theta decay, meaning it's not vulnerable to degradation over time. Bitcoin miners exist at this bridge between the physical and digital reality. They are incentivized to harness stranded energy. The stranded energy exists naturally in our physical reality, but is usually geographically isolated from populated areas. This may manifest as the energy from volcanoes, geothermal springs, waterfalls, ocean currents, high wind zones, and other wild manifestations of Mother Nature. Transporting electricity across distance becomes increasingly difficult with each kilometer of transportation required. Transporting electricity across time becomes increasingly inefficient with each hour of battery life required. Bitcoin has effectively opened a new avenue to transport energy across both space and time. Tick-tock, next block. Bitcoin's monetary system introduces the concept of cryptographically verified measurements of time into cyberspace. These timeframes can be relied upon to remain constant indefinitely into the future. Approximately every 10 minutes, the network generates a new block of transactions. Approximately every 2 weeks, or precisely every 2016 blocks, the network difficulty adjusts to guide the interval between new blocks closer to the 10-minute target. Approximately every 4 years, or precisely every 210,000 blocks, or roughly 104 difficulty adjustments, the block subsidy rewarded to miners is cut in half. All our computers reference this time of day, but this is self-referential from the data set it operates on, not a derivative substantiated in mathematics or physics. Einstein's theory of relativity showed the world that time is not as linear as we may think. The speed of light is the constant, not time itself. Moving clocks tick more slowly than stationary clocks. Objects extremely divergent in motion through space do not share the same experience of time. This is why we must constantly adjust the time on GPS satellites to align with our time on Earth. The human concept of time works well enough for us on Earth because we are all hurling through space on a rock at roughly the same speed. But whenever you have a ledger, it relies on the concept of time because the order of entries on the ledger is important. You need to identify which transactions came in first. And ledgers are never decentralized if they can't keep track of time on their own. The block height when a Bitcoin transaction is confirmed is when a ledger entry on the Bitcoin network is essentially time-stamped by Bitcoin miners. There is always a lag between information sent and information received, with information being constrained by the speed of light as a maximum. Think of it as the speed limit of the universe. It takes about 8.5 minutes for light to travel from the sun to Earth, and about 3 minutes for light to travel from Earth to Mars. The information we send over the internet is much slower than the speed of light due to the drift velocity of the electrons and the electricity, and these variable effects create what is called Bitcoin's hash horizon, or the physical barrier beyond which it would be impossible for nodes and miners on Earth to reach consensus with the entities beyond the hash horizon within the 10-minute time frame required by the Bitcoin network. In this sense, the hash horizon protects the network from attack from an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. But by the same token, if human beings were to ever colonize the galaxy, the hash horizon would impose a physical barrier to all of humanity using the original blockchain. There would inevitably be chain splits to overcome this physical limitation. Energy reserves themselves exist in the physical realm and are thus subject to security concerns and the inherent vulnerability of military power projection from foreign adversaries. As scarce as Bitcoin may be, oil is far scarcer and completely vulnerable to theft from foreign militaries. Ironically, one of the major drivers of demand for oil is the military-industrial complex. As oil reserves are depleted, competition among militaries for the remaining oil reserves will increase, leading to even greater demand for oil, depleting the oil reserves even further. This is a classic negative feedback loop, but it's not a new phenomenon. Oil wars have been going on for most of our lives. Imagine a hypothetical scenario where the American empire was no longer in decline and was able to secure 100% access to all global oil reserves and crush all foreign militaries. Even under this scenario, the United States would still need to sell oil onto the global market to support their economy, which is dependent on global trade, boost GDP, and prevent the collapse of their sovereign debt markets. Substitute any other empire in the scenario and they all face the same dilemma. Remember that Bitcoin is a call option on energy with no theta decay. Naturally, it makes sense to store the proceeds of energy sales in this monetary network, as difficult as securing 100% of the global oil reserves would be. Projecting enough military power to ensure dominance over a long period of time would be far more difficult. Every single empire that has tried to project military power over the entire globe has collapsed under the expense of this operation. Bitcoin is far more efficient at storing energy through space and time than the most dominant militaries. We can never fully divorce physical energy reserves from their physical reality, but we can transmute our existing supplies into digital energy that can be held secure